Hello and welcome back. It's Michelle Houghton here at Copic in the Craft Room. I am be coloring up the stamp by Rubbernecker Stamps, and I am going to be doing a darker skin tone again. And I have discovered that the internet speeds in my new home in Alaska are quite a bit faster, and so a lot of the videos you're going to see over the next few weeks are going to be in real time because I can do some longer videos. So this isn't going to go fast. This is going to be the actual pace at which I work. You're going to see that. I'm not going to talk through the whole thing because that would be an awful lot of chatter, but so there will be some quiet or some music, whichever I have time to kind of dub in, but you're going to get a good sense of kind of the speed that one of these images take me. Now keep in mind that I've done some pre-planning and pre-working that you're not seeing on the video, so I've experimented a little bit with color. I might even start one and decide I need to take a different route, and so you're seeing that second or third attempt, or even fourth. But so you're seeing the smoothest version of what I've done, but it doesn't mean it's the first one. It doesn't mean it's how easy this is for me each of these times. I've done some pre-work that you're not getting to see. So the first thing I'm doing on this one is I am basing her with a light earth tone. This is E31 this time. Eventually that E31 is going to disappear entirely. You will not see that in the end of the image. It's going to get a whole lot darker. This is just taking that white away and starting with a base color that is a darker tone already. For skin tones that I get extremely dark, I usually will do this with the intent that this color is not going to be showing in the end, even in the highlight areas. But it truly is to take away that white of the paper and to deepen that tone right from the get-go. The next color I'm pulling out is E35. You're going to notice I skipped at least one in this little jump that I've made. I know again that this is going to be quite a bit darker, so I'm jumping to what is going to be my mid-tone color, which is E35, and this step takes the longest in every face that I do, and that I'm mapping out where I want that shading to happen or those darker tones to come in. I'm trying to add contours to her face, so I'm going in around her eyes and deepening the eyes. That's part of our face that goes back away from the viewer. And then I'm coming up under her cheekbones, both sides. I'm kind of working down the face from top to bottom. I'll usually pick one side of the nose. I usually will not shade on both sides of the nose. In this case, because she's slightly turned to that left, I'm going to come down that left-hand side because that's the side that would appear slightly darker. I'm going to add a little bit deeper shading along that left side as well. Again, it's because it's turned away from the viewer, and so that's why I've chosen that side. Coming down the sides of the neck and up under the collarbone, up under the chin. She'll have a little bit of shading on both sides of the neck, but not a whole lot. It'll be pretty faint, and then kind of right in that little dip right in between the clavicles. And then I'm going to work down the hands as well. I did go into the interior of the ear, kind of the back side of the hand, right in the crease of the palm. And you'll see a little bit down the sides of each wrist. I do add a touch on the fingers as well. Remember, this is going to get darker, and that lighter E31 will disappear. The underside of the fingers, on the other hand, underside of the hand, tiny hint. It's going to look a little bit skeleton-like on the back of the hand, but the artist has hinted that we can see those knuckles and some of that residual shape, so I'm adding to that. Right along that bottom edge of the fingers. Now these are super skinny fingers, so you may or may not be able to get in there. It's going to depend on your pressure control and how well you can control that little tiny nib. You could try using the chisel nib. It's a lot stiffer and might give you that finer line. The next step is actually the next darkest color, which is that E37. And this is going to be the darkest earth tone I use on this face. It's going to go into all of those areas in smaller amounts. So I'm coming back with the E35. E35 and E37 happen to be two earth tones that are very similar. So this is going to take very little blending. It's really just touching on the edges of that E37. It's going to pull it into the E35, which is going to make those mid-tone areas even darker because I'm adding another layer of ink. So she looks stranger as I go until I hit this next step. But trust me, this is going to work. I've done it once or twice. So now we're going to take this to kind of this last step on the skin, and I'm using an E33, which is the number that I skipped. I'm going to soften the edge of that E35. So I'm coming in and really kind of circling right on top of the edge of the E35, and then I'm pulling across that entire lighter area. You can experiment around with this and try kind of whatever technique works for you. For me, this is what works. By circling a little bit on the edge of that darker color, it kind of softens it up, starts blending that ink already, and then as I pull into that lighter area, it's ready to kind of pull into and smooth across the lighter area. But you can see what's happening. The E31 is disappearing altogether, and now I've got that layer of the E33 on top of it and softening into the E35 and E37. You can do this in a whole slew of ways, and I've done this before where you see me go through all of the colors and work my way all the way back. I've taken out a step this time and just jumped right into that mid-tone and come back and finished with the tone that I would like to be the lightest on her skin. It saves layering some ink, and it actually makes it a little bit easier to blend, but it also saves me one of the issues that people have sometimes with doing darker skin tones is when it gets gummy because they've put some of that heavy ink on top of their paper. They have trouble getting it blended, so they've got lots of ink on top of their paper and it ends up kind of getting sticky and gummy. This helps me use less ink but still get those same really nice, deep, rich tones in the skin. So I added a little bit of color back in on her ear because it just didn't get quite dark enough. And now I'm coming back in with a blue violet into some of the deepest areas. So up underneath her hairline, into the ear. I'm going to do a little bit at the corners of the eyes. Again, I'm looking for the areas that would sink back the furthest, possibly have a cast shadow. I've experimented with the blue violets a little bit about which ones work on which skin tones. And so I know that this BV25 is going to work on the top of this color combination. It's dark enough that it sits well. It doesn't need a whole lot of blending. In fact, most of the time I can leave it right where it sits. I don't have to do any blending. There'll be a couple little spots where I do on this face, but there's others that I won't need to touch again. It just sits just right. But looking for those deepest areas. I'll do a tiny bit of blending in a couple spots, like down in that little dip below her neck, on the clavicles, and then pretty much step away from the skin. A little bit of E04 on her lips, and then I'm also going to use this time an R59. She looks like she's dressed up to me, so we got a little lipstick going this time. If I was doing that natural skin tone or natural lip color, I'd probably use the E09, but I'm adding a little bit deeper red this time with the R59 to show kind of a deep red lipstick going on. And then I think we're going to move on to hair. All right, hair is next, and I am going to do a really quick broad wash of E43 across the entire head of hair. When I am doing almost black or black hair, this is a lot of times the color I will base in. You can do all sorts of things with black hair. You can base it in a red or a violet or so cooler, warmer tones. This particular combination you're going to see is one that I use a lot, and it looks like a really deep, deep brown, almost black, but it stays brown. But the E4s have kind of a grayish undertone to them, and so I think it works really, really well for that. So you're going to notice it's not smooth by any means. It's actually pretty rough, and I want it that way because, again, this is what's going to peek through. E44 is the next color in the lineup. And this is where I'm doing that very first layer of texture. It goes over the entire head of hair. So I'm doing what I'm calling squiggling or scribbling is what most people would call this. It's going back and forth. There's some loops, some not. You see angles, you see curves. I go to the right, the left, up, down. But it's really just squiggling across the entire head of hair. E47 is next. This is going to get darker. It's going to go over most of the hair. I'm using the exact same stroke. I'm not trying to follow my previous lines at all. In fact, it should not follow the lines. Now what you're going to see here is as I get toward the top of her hair, I'm breaking those up a little bit. So it's not quite as solid with the texture. It breaks. There's some little tiny pieces of squiggles. You might see a couple dots instead. So I'm framing her face with that darker tone or those darker colors as it curves back in toward her face. Behind her ears, it gets fairly dark. So I'm thinking about, again, now the shape of her hair and trying to create the look of that by adding these layers of the squiggles. I like the look of these, and a lot of people don't. They have a hard time keeping them small enough, and that's one of the things I would tell you is keeping it really small is really important, especially on a small image like this. E49 is next. Now E49 is almost black if you've used this color before. So again, I'm going to use less of this color. It's focused in around the edge of her face. It's going to go up into those higher areas, but in much less amounts. So again, I'm breaking those up, little small pieces of squiggles versus those long strings that I started with. But hopefully you can start to see the shape a little bit. That's kind of that rounded, soft shape. And that is what I'm going for. When you do a technique like this on hair, one option to soften at the end is to kind of do a wash with your lightest color at the very end. I'm not going to do it on this particular head of hair because I really like how it turns out, but that would be an option. And it's not scrubbing it. We're not scrubbing, but you could do a wash, a very light once over with your lightest color to soften some of that visual squiggle that you're seeing. Don't forget her eyebrows. I almost did, but I usually come back in with one of my darker colors and hit eyebrows if they're open on an image. So this time I'm using that E47. I didn't feel like I needed to go all the way to that E49. Came back in and did that. And then I'm going to do one last step on the hair. This is really warm and I want to cool it down so it's even closer to black. So I'm going to do that here in just a second, but I know I'm going to start working on the eyes here, and I want to, when I stamp this image, the pupil of the eye and the eyelash didn't get super dark. It's actually a little bit gray. So I'm coming in with a multi-liner. This one is a very small one, a 0.03, and I'm going to fill in the pupil, leave the white if I can that the artist left, and I'm also going to go over the top lash line to really define those. The reason I'm doing that now is that if I immediately go over a Copic multi-liner with Copic ink, it can blur. And the last thing I want to do now that I have this beautiful skin and wonderful hair is blur ink across one of the eyes. It would just destroy me because there's no correcting that. So I'm going to let it color it now, and then it'll be ready to come in with some eye color here in a minute once it's had a few seconds to dry. So back to the hair, last color, because I want to cool it down and take it even closer to that almost black hair, is C9. This is going to go on the same areas that the E49 did, maybe even a little bit less, but it's going to push it and cool that color down just enough. I love the effect of it. It also separates that hair from the skin tone and gives us that jump in level. So we have all the fun details left. I'm going to use some reds on the flower and her jewels. So I've got an R21, then I'm going to use an R85 and that R59. And I'm just coming into the inner pieces of each of those petals with the darker color, and I'll do the same with the R59. I'll do a little bit of blending with the R85, and then you're also going to see me hit kind of a couple of her jewels with those reds as well. She's got quite a few bangles on, and I'm going to color those gold. So I'm using a Y00. I'm leaving a white highlight on all of them. It's a little hard to see because they are so small. And I'm also using a Y28. Um, so that comes part way in, again, completely leaving a white highlight. I'll do a tiny bit of blending with the Y21 on that biggest band. You won't see a lot of blending just because they are so small. I'm going to use a little bit of colorless blender right in the kind of reflective spot of that gemstone. And I'm not trying to really push the color, I'm just trying to soften that edge just a little bit. I am going to rub that off to the side because a lot of times those deep reds will pick up a little bit on that colorless blender. If you need to, you could do a little bit in the white highlight of the gold areas as well. And then I'm going to use two colors on her eyes. She really only needs one. They are super, super tiny, but I'm going to use a Y23 and then an E35. I tried the E33 first, but it just doesn't even show up. So I wanted a little bit deeper color, but still keeping that kind of golden brown color. So E35 worked, and I'm keeping that E35 really just dotting up right up against the lid line, and then the Y23 is lower. All right, she has her glass left, and I've got a YR30. My gal is drinking a sparkling cider because that's what all of my people drink in their champagne and wine glasses, and or lemonade or Pepsi. But I've got the YR30 and then a Y23 just to kind of give it a little bit of a golden shade to it. If you wanted, you could come back and add some little dots of white or a reflective on the glass, but it's so small and she's got her fingers wrapped around that, so it gets a little bit hard kind of getting into that. So I kept it really simple, added a touch of color and just left it at that. Didn't try to add any reflective surfaces or anything in the midst of that. All right, well, that is pretty much her. I do appreciate you stopping by as always. I hope you are getting some coloring time in. I hope in your area things are opening up and you're getting out and about a little bit more. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you very much to Rubbernecker Stamps for allowing me to continue doing some coloring tutorials this summer. I'll get back to card making in the fall when I have all my equipment. If you haven't stopped by my website recently, stop by www.scrapweaver.com for all my teaching live events. Thank you so much and have a happy, colorful day.